Join us by the fireside for our evening tales of true life's strange experiences with things that lie beyond the veil of the known and into the misty depths of the mysterious and unknown.
The veterans. A couple of years ago, when I was staying at my grandfather's place, he told me this story. I don't remember how it came up exactly. It kind of fits in with, all these ghost stories that people are sharing. It was really out of the blue, and I was kind of taken aback. So I actually decided to write it down just to try and, record the details so I wouldn't forget. But this isn't the exact words that he used, but I'm telling the story that he shared with me, so it's enough. Back in the 1960s, my grandfather, on my dad's side, he was drafted into the army for the Vietnam War. He was discharged in late 1972, and he drifted apart from all his war buddies except for one. They all lived quite close to each other in Washington state, and they both had PTSD issues. So, definitely they had been emotionally injured during the war. So, anyway, they decided to go on a hunting trip together just as a way to just kind of heal, and it was the autumn season in 1973, and they wanted to, just find some closure post war. As he was telling me, he would always like to go deer hunting in the woods behind his house. His home was more of a cabin. It had some basic necessities and stuff. And it was in rural Washington state, and it was probably the afternoon. Anyone who's been in the Pacific Northwest forest knows how thick and incredibly dense the foliage and the trees are. And there's also quite often a fog. You really can't see ahead of you. I mean, it can get so bad. Sight lines become blurred, and you just feel so kind of disoriented. And sounds also become amplified, by the way. It gives you a really creepy feeling of isolation, and it actually causes your blood pressure to rise. So anyway, my grandfather and his friend from Vietnam, they were both hunting off the trail, and they were tying markers to trees, quite bright colored tree branches as they went through the underbrush so that they wouldn't get lost. Suddenly, they heard a sound. It was the blaring sound of a train horn. It was really loud, and it caused them both, to become disoriented. My grandfather recalls that he fell to his knees. He had placed his hands on his ear, and he was screaming, and he felt his throat moving air, and yet he wasn't hearing anything. This sound doesn't seem to have direction. The sound it just comes from everywhere. It's kind of all encompassing, apparently. It's just everywhere. The ground was shaking, and then it stopped and it started to dissipate in like an instant. This just started to dissipate. This sound just started to go. The two men, were actually just kneeling there, and they couldn't speak. They were stunned. Their ears were ringing really badly, and they couldn't even hear their own voices. They were talking, but it's like no sound came out of their mouths. As the sun set, they began to head back, obviously spooked beyond belief. Their eardrums are shot. They write down notes to each other on a notepad as they hike back to my grandfather's cabin because they can't hear anything temporarily. As they're heading back, they see something hanging behind a tree up ahead on the trail. The outline of whatever it was were blurred, but it sort of floated. And this was the best way my grandpa could describe it to me. Towards them, and then it was revealed. It's themselves. It wasn't like looking in a mirror per se, because it was a creature. My grandfather felt it. The thing was kind of fuzzy and blurry. And my grandfather, who was actually in his 30s at the time, said that he saw himself as an old man with a white beard and he had sunken, frail eyes. He had to squint, and then his facial features were the same. His war friend had a bullet hole in his head, and then this strange figure just kind of morphed into a black something, like a kind of eternal void kind of thing. The early evening orange sun rays just ended when they reached this blackness. They panicked at this point. They running backwards into the woods and they were screaming like mad men. As darkness fell, they decided to keep on going and they refused to camp out in those woods. As my grandfather told me this story, and he wasn't really an overly religious man, but he said, I don't know what in the hell that thing was that we saw, but I do know for sure, and I mean damn sure, it wasn't from this earth. What still bothers me is that I never saw what it actually looked like. I thought that maybe it was some kind of manifestation of the devil. I mean, this thing was evil. That's all I can say. It was evil. And I'll tell you, I saw true evil in people during the war. But that thing, I don't know what it was. It was something else. It was an evil thing. And if I would have gotten closer, well, he trailed off there. But his uncomfortable, haunted glance practically finished the rest. After sprinting for a few miles, their flashlights luckily had apparently illuminated their trail markers, and then eventually they reached the cabin. The night sky was so dark and it was completely moonless. They stayed in the cabin until sunrise, and their rifles were loaded, and they were right next to them. And the windows and doors were locked. Blinds were shut, and there were no lights on. If that thing was still out there, their wooden door would have been a relatively fragile barrier to break down. They were so nervous and just frozen. They paced the floor of that cabin all night, and it must have been the longest time. And it was probably just crawling along until eventually they began to pray. Neither man ever being raised religious, yet these two men were battle hardened. They were Vietnam veterans, and they had both seen combat. They weren't easily spooked. They had PTSD, but for something to scare them that easily, no, it wouldn't have happened. Personally, the whole story just made my skin crawl. Yet, with this said, no other strange encounters or experiences happened that night, and nothing ever again tormented my grandfather. He moved shortly thereafter to a different town in Washington, and he promptly met my grandmother. But he refuses to this day, nearly 50 years later, he refuses to set foot inside a forest or a woods. That night just scarred him for life. My grandfather said that the thing he and his friends saw in the woods that night was a bad, accurate omen for their lives. My grandfather's been struggling with alcoholism all his life since then, and he has had a liver transplant and he still drinks every day. His friend committed suicide in 1975. He couldn't handle his own personal problems. And so perhaps if there had been proper mental health services back then, maybe things would have turned out differently, but I don't know. It's as if something just stayed with them, something haunted them for the rest of their lives in some way. It just scarred them. I can't explain it, but it was just one of those things that is beyond explanation. That is a really, really frightening story. I can't imagine what these men, the fear they must have experienced with something like that, something that's after all they had seen in the war, all the terrible sights, people killing each other. But then to experience something that's just, like from another world, I mean, what do you do with that? You know? It just seems cruel that they had to go through something like this after they had, been through so much trauma during the war. But fortunately, I mean, they made it out of there, but it's almost like something haunted them for the rest of their lives and maybe even, kind of put some sort of curse on them. I don't know. It almost sounds like that. The old derelict house. When I was about 16 years old and I just gotten my driving license, it was a Friday after school, and I was hanging out with some of my friends from another school area, my girlfriend and her best friend. We all lived in a small rural town that had absolutely nothing in radius of about 40 miles except a Walmart and a couple of gas stations. Since there was nothing to do, we used to go ghost hunting. It pretty much meant finding abandoned buildings and checking them out. We never really experienced anything supernatural, but it was kind of a fun and interesting thing to do. And it involved, just hanging out with friends and just doing something together. I had seen a house off a highway a few times and I wanted to check it out, so I told my friends about it. They decided it was a good idea, and so we decided to go and check it out. We decided to stop by Walmart to grab some flashlights, and I wanted batteries for my camera too. Two of my friends and I bought flashlights and a 2 pack of batteries each, and I bought a 4 pack for my camera. We all have a habit of keeping batteries for flashlights, and just in case of emergency backups, because they don't seem to last very long usually. So, armed with a few flashlights and with batteries, and we got some energy drinks as well, we decided to head out to this house. This house was tall and it had a basement and it was like 2 stories. It was all broken down and probably about half a mile off the highway in the middle of a huge field. You could see it on a hill the entire hike. Just seeing it standing there in the moonlight, with the moonlight shining on it, was so creepy. And so the idea of even just going into it was worse. There was also an old barn outside, and it had broken down, and it was probably about 50 yards or so to the right side of the house. The closer we walked to it, the stranger and weirder it felt. It was like, hair was standing on the back of my neck or something, and it was just really strange feeling. The front porch steps were broken, so we actually had to climb to the porch to get in. Stepping over all the rubble and debris that other people had created by breaking into the place, we made our way in finally. On the way through the living room to the kitchen, my girlfriend claimed that she felt like someone was pulling her sweatshirt and the hood on her shirt. I was the last person, and I was several feet behind her. I figured she was either so scared that she was imagining things or that she was just trying to freak us out and saying stuff to, just to mess with us. We made our way around the kitchen and we were on our way up the stairs, and she gasped. And then she spun round, claiming that she felt that someone had pulled her hood again. And she said that this was just an a-hole thing for trying and that it was scaring her. I told her and swore it wasn't me, and we continued taking pictures all the way. We made it to the top of the stairs, and there was this big hole in the attic. I started to walk towards it and taking pictures. I snapped one on the way to it, and then I got a little bit closer and took another one. The stairs at the attic were in a room to the left, and there was a hallway with rooms off of it to the right. We all went to the attic area first, and we decided to check that out, which all that was up there was really just an old wooden ladder and a broken crate. We walked back down and we went to the second floor, and we were all just disappointed. At that point, I was the only one with a flashlight out, so Everybody was following me, and they were all just going through the hallway, and we went to a room on the left. It really seemed breezy in the room compared to the rest of the house, even though there were broken open windows all throughout it. After the last one of us was about to step in, my flashlight just suddenly went out. It was still turned on, but it just went dead. The first thing I was thinking about was there's no way that, the flashlight could just go dead in 20 minutes with like brand new batteries, and it was an LED flashlight. And then suddenly I heard, "My phone is dead." "Yeah, mine too," from my girlfriend and her best friend. So one by one, my other friends pulled out their flashlights. They flicked them on and off, and nothing happened. They weren't working. I then tried my camera out, and I took it out of my pocket to take pictures with the hope of maybe just catching something weird. But the screen was black with a flashing red dead battery symbol. It was at this point that we were all really freaked out, and we were practically fighting each other to get the hell out of that room. Once we made it up to the stairs, the flashlights and my camera worked again, and they had about three-fourths of a battery bar, and the cell phones were able to be turned back on. I just got goosebumps and tensed up, and we hastened our pace down the stairs and figured the easiest way out would be through the basement door that we saw under the porch on the way in, since the porch stairs were all broken. The thing is that this was not the least of the creepy ways out, so it was just getting really scary because this was the only way we could go to get out. Anyway, we made it down to the basement, and then it turned out to be a bit of a maze, because it looked like it was just all overgrown, and we had to, fight our way through vines and just the overgrowth of vegetation, which was over the door to the outside. And we made our way from the house. Probably about 200 yards away from the house itself, we heard what sounded like a food tin can being kind of dragged along the ground. And then it sounded like it was rolling down the basement steps. I don't remember even noticing a tin can anywhere around the house. We all started running, and we ran as fast as we could, and while being careful also not to trip over all the weeds and things. Once we got back to the car, we tried to decide what had just happened. I started looking through all the photos that I took. They all just looked like dust particle ridden pictures of an old house, except for one. I had taken a snap of two pictures of the attic, and the first one was just like all the others. But the second one had a thick, white, smoky, misty kind of stuff over the whole. It wasn't cold. So there couldn't have been breath mist, and no one was smoking. So what was that? To be honest, to this day, I still get goosebumps when I look through those pictures. I did send these to a paranormal investigating group, and they actually told me that I had some interesting experiences. Um, and the pictures were also pretty scary, and there was definitely something there. So suffice it to say, we never went back to that house. I would not want to set foot in there ever again. It was just more the atmosphere than anything else. There was just definitely something going on there. Well, I certainly wouldn't have gone in there, but I guess you feel a little bit stronger when you're with friends or a group of people. But even so, I mean, to just go right into this derelict house, at night and stuff, I mean, that's just kind of asking for trouble because you could have even just fallen through the floorboards or something. Anything could have happened. But the fact that it's haunted, I mean, that's bad enough as it is.